Saul Griffith, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you, Sarah.
Nice to have you here. Now, what's wrong with Andrew Forrest's ambition to become one of the world's biggest producers and exporters of green hydrogen?
Nothing is necessarily wrong with his vision to do that. And if anywhere and anyone in the world is well positioned to create an export industry for hydrogen, that is a reasonably sensible thing to perhaps do on the North Shelf of Australia.
I think you also said that a future for green hydrogen was mad, bad and dangerous. What did you mean?
Let's be clear, the whole world and Australia in particular are over-investing in the idea of hydrogen as the large, big component of the global energy system. The International Energy Agency projects that half of the electricity in the world will be used to make hydrogen in 2050. This is absurd. The cheapest energy that a consumer has ever had in the world is Australian rooftop solar, and anything that we use hydrogen for is going to be more expensive than just using that solar to do it electrically.
That's if we're talking about electrification, but in the case of Fortescue and the case of Twiggy Forrest, and you were very critical of the potential for those deals to go ahead, they're not talking about replacing electrification. They're talking about exporting green hydrogen to be part of Germany's fuel mix, energy mix rather.
You have to be cautious about the capacity for that to really play out. Electricity is so cheap with wind energy, solar energy, and that is true in Europe as it is in Australia.
Not everywhere in Europe. I'm not here to make Fortescue Metals case, but
not everywhere and not yet. But you have to ask yourself which remaining industries will go to hydrogen. Some people argue steel, but the price of hydrogen is 10 times the price of the energy content of natural gas or coal going into steel making. It's the majority of the price of steel. Making that steel directly with electricity is not only possible, but will be a cheaper way to do it than hydrogen. So that's unlikely.
Let's talk about your general approach, your broader advocacy for this big shift to renewables in Australia. One of the things you argue is that we should be electrifying households very quickly, deploying more solar and installing household batteries. The principle sounds right. How can people afford it? Well, correct me if I'm wrong.
So it's even more than that, and we really should think about electrifying the entire domestic economy. So that means our houses, that means our commercial sector, which is our small businesses. They produce carbon right now through their cars and vehicles, through their heating systems, and we can eliminate the gas in those heating systems with technologies you can buy today, that if we're powering them with a mixture of Australian rooftop solar and grid electricity, is already cheaper than natural gas in every market in Australia. Similarly, if you could power a petrol vehicle or make it an electric version of the Hilux, if you could power that off rooftop solar in Australia, it would be 1 cent per kilometre to drive that vehicle, whereas we currently spend a huge amount of foreign currency to buy foreign oil, and it costs you 20 cents a kilometre to drive a petrol vehicle.
So how would we make this domestic transformation, the thing you're talking about, which is at a domestic level? We're used to talking about this as a challenge in terms of heavy industry. Very few people are talking about such a vast transformation at the domestic level. How would we pay for it?
So I spent the last 2 years working on climate policy for the Biden administration through an organisation called Rewiring America. We prosecuted the macroeconomic argument in America that it is anti-inflationary to electrify everything, including all the vehicles and all of the houses. That's because fossil fuels for the last 30 years increases and increases and literally defines inflation. But if you buy solar today and you buy an electric car today and you finance them, the price remains constant for the next 20 years for the life of those machines. So that is literally anti-inflationary. That led to creating about $140 billion in tax incentives, rebates, subsidies and other incentives for every American household to electrify all of its vehicles, its hot water heating systems, its space heating systems, even its kitchen and cooking systems. And you can project that by 2030 that will save every American household $2,000 to $3,000 a year.
It's an immense program.
It's the largest climate legislation in human history. It literally will completely transform the North American energy economy.
So the question is, how do you replicate that here?
That would be quite easy to replicate in Australia. In fact, I've returned to live in Australia because we are literally 5 or 10 years ahead of North America and Europe on this project because we've already had the rooftop solar miracle in Australia. That was good policy, both economically and rebating the early adopters of that technology. We did workforce development and training, and we eliminated red tape. So those three things.
Moved very fast. But I just want to stay with this idea.
But I'm giving you the idea. So those three things were critical to give us this extraordinarily cheap solar. So if you do the same modelling for Australia that we do for the US, Australian households, if they had all electric vehicles in their driveway, electric water heater, electric space heating, electric kitchens, they'd be saving closer to $5,000 a year by 2030. And they would be saving money today if we get them there. So
but the problem, of course, now is that we know the upfront costs are high. People can't afford to go out and
so this is where you have to make the macroeconomic case for the nation, right? So if Australia...
Put that in simple terms for people who don't want to play with macroeconomics.
If we spent less money than we do on one submarine to help every Australian household as their cars retire buy an electric one, that is a subsidy in the near term. By about 2025, the economics of the whole market shift, and it's now cheaper because the costs are still falling on the batteries, the costs are still falling on electric vehicles, the costs are still falling on the heat pumps. By 2025 or 2026, it will make economic sense for every Australian household to make those decisions at every purchase point.
So this is
a small,
passionate
upfront, and let's call
argument.
it an investment, because it's an investment in the Australian economy of around about $12 billion, we could be saving $40 billion a year by the end of this decade.
You're saying a big upfront investment by the government is what we need to shift.
In the US,
the
they acknowledged the truth of these statements, and this is an anti-inflationary investment in the future of the country that lowers the cost of living for real households and saves the country more money than the government invests. That is even more true if we did it in Australia, and we can do it here today.
I just want to make one point, which that big bill that we were talking about in the US did include large subsidies for green hydrogen.
They were dwarfed by the investments in household and small business electrification. And let's be very, very clear, we will not solve any emissions in the domestic Australian economy this decade with hydrogen. We can achieve 50% emission reductions by 2030 in our domestic economy by investing in households and small businesses, and they are real achievable emission reductions that are measurable and could be done immediately.
Saul Griffith, you've brought some very interesting new ideas to the table, and for that I am extremely grateful. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.